what's the thing that I think I can bring to the world? What's my unique gift? But I look back, and the one thing that I always felt so connected to was bringing more joy into people's lives. And so what I finally realized was that my mission on this planet is to leave everybody I meet with at least 5% more joy than when I found them. And so this whole notion of bringing joy into people's lives, this has a ripple effect on humanity. Like, forget business or success, traditional success. This is a ripple effect on humanity.
Well, listen, you know what's cool is you have a mission statement that it took you a while to get to. And I think you fumbled, understanding your story a little bit, you fumbled through, how can I find my mission? Who am I serving? What am I doing? Tell the audience about your mission statement. And when I say mission statement, it could be your value prop, whatever you want to call it, but it's really your impact. Talk about your impact for a second, because I think there's some alignment and we can really talk deep on a couple of things here.
For sure. Yeah. Well, where it came from was that I would be in these rooms with these big, people that are very accomplished doing these huge things. And, my mission is to reform the entire education system and to touch a billion lives. And I walk in these rooms like, crap, I don't have one of those. Like, I don't know. Like, I want to make an impact, but I haven't keyed into the thing. Like, what's the title? What's the noun? And then I realized it was less about a specific outcome that was, quantitative, and it was more a qualitative thing. What's the thing that I think I can bring to the world? What's my unique gift that I think can actually make an impact, regardless of numbers or specific outcomes? And for me, I look back through childhood, and we can talk about as much or as little of that as you want, but I look back, and the one thing that I always felt so connected to was bringing more joy into people's lives. And so much of that is because of my own, history of suffering and having a lack of joy and wanting to have more joy in my own life. And so I finally took a step back, and instead of having kind of a traditional mission or traditional vision or traditional kind of thing that you would see, which there's nothing wrong with that. If you're somebody who has one of those, I want to impact 1 billion people, fan-frickin-tastic. I love that for you. For me, that just didn't show up. And so what I finally realized was that my mission on this planet is to leave everybody I meet with at least 5% more joy than when I found them. And that can be in a coaching session with my clients. It can be on stage speaking, or it can be with the barista at the coffee shop, or the TSA agent when I'm going through security, or my own family, or my friends, or strangers, or whoever. And so it just opens up my impact at a whole new level.
Yeah. And this is why I brought it up, because I believe wholeheartedly that we are the energy that we put out into the world. And so if we are constantly seeing joy in people's life and increasing joy in people's life, and that's what your goal is, it means that you're deliberately giving joy to other people. You're acknowledging them when they're in their mundane at the TSA check-in, and you're allowing a smile to meet the person who's checking your ID, or, you're making an effort to do things that you're authentically practicing, not just something that you're doing every day to get on stage and tell people about.
Right. That's exactly right. And the thing is too, man, it is a bit of a selfish endeavor. Number one, because I feel good when I see other people be joyful, but it's also selfish in that, I still remember there was this one day I was doing a talk in Vegas, and this was not too long after the Mandalay Bay shootings had happened there. And I was staying in the hotel right across. I could look down and see the Mandalay Bay where the shooting actually happened. And it occurred to me in that moment that people who feel seen, who feel heard, who feel joyful, it doesn't occur to them to inflict harm on other people. It's not that they have the thought and they go, no, you know what, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't even occur to them. And so this whole notion of bringing joy into people's lives, or if it doesn't have to be joy for you, maybe it's being seen, being heard, like really understanding those around you, making time, being present. This has a ripple effect on humanity. Like, forget business or success, traditional success. This is a ripple effect on humanity. So if you want to see less of the crap that you see on the news right now, look at bringing more joy into the world for the people around you.
Yeah. I think I don't know the quote, but I know Twain says, start in your own family, in your own circle, if you want to make a difference in the world. That's and right. The reality is it's true. I left, I was up in Northern Virginia last week, and I was going to the grocery store to grab something, and there's a homeless guy sitting there. And as I walked past, I just gotten out of church. I'm walking past the guy. I said, "Hey, are you hungry?" And the guy's like, "I could use a couple bucks for food later." And I said, "I'm going to go in the store and I'm going to get you food right now. What do you want?" And he was shocked. And he's like, why do you want to do that? And I said, "Well, do you need some food or not?" He said, "I'd love to put some stuff in my backpack." And I said, "Great, then let me get you some food." And these aren't I'm a good guy stories. These are moments where when you see an opportunity to give someone a different piece of humanity. Like, obviously the pain that human's in, and probably the drugs that he was addicted to, are things that he's trying to fight through. And that's the pain that you talked about, right? But if somebody can just reach a hand out and say, hey, everybody's not bad, the world's not that bad, pain is not everywhere, here's a second, and it starts with a sub or a candy bar. And, you know, and I feel like that is what a mission of 5% joy is all about. And I love that about your mission. And I know it's not a perfect mission statement, but it's a better way to live, which is impact. Tell the audience a little bit about your background, because I feel like it's interesting. You described a little bit of pain. I know that you never knew your father. Your mother raised you, and she is a beautiful, wonderful, worried Jewish mother, or which I have an Italian Catholic mom and grandmother, and so they're of kindred spirits. And so I understand. Worry is praying for what you don't want, is what I told my mom last night. So I understand. But a little bit of that shaped a little bit of who you are, and you struggle with weight and all kinds of things, but your transformation is what brought you here. And I think that part of your story is really worth sharing with our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, it's shaped everything about who I am. And so, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So my dad left my mom as soon as he found out she was pregnant. He gave her the option, have an abortion or I'm leaving. She said, I'm not doing that. And he said, peace out, and never turned back. And so never saw him, never saw a picture of him, never talked to him. He was just gone. Mom never was married after that. And so it was just me and mom my entire life, right? Just the two of us. And I was an only child as well. And so from a very early age, my mom, who is this lovely, wonderful, incredibly worrisome Jewish mother in all the best ways. If you're listening, Mom, hi. In fact, you're probably on the payroll, Scott, anyways. You'll probably report to her right after this. So I love her to death. And from a very young age, I had to kind of be the manager of a lot of her emotions. Right. She dealt with a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and I find no fault at all. I mean, knowing who I am as a human now, raising me must have not been the easiest thing in the world, and to do it all by yourself as well. And so I learned from a very young age, like, I need to manage people's emotions around me. Right. And so that meant her emotions, to me, her emotions were more important than mine. And so I kind of neglected myself. And so between that and then, soothing myself with food from a very young age, and gaining weight from a very young age, getting up to 250 pounds when I was 15, 330 pounds when I was in my late 20s, and going back through this entire thing, looking at my own anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation that I had all the way up and through my, my late 20s and in my early 30s, and just kind of looking at the whole picture. When I look back, I realized there were two things that kind of kept me sane when I was growing up, right? Beyond the soothing with food. Number one was making people laugh, right? If I could make people laugh, I would feel connected to them. And especially in school where I would get picked on, if I could make people laugh, there was less likelihood they would pick on me. So it became kind of a defense mechanism, but one that served. And the second thing was empathy. And I didn't have the language for this when I was a kid, but I tended to be the one that everybody came to with their problems, especially girls. And because the girls weren't interested in me as like a boyfriend, because I was like
safe, but you were safe.
I was a fat, dorky kid. I was safe. And so I would sit there and actually listen to them, and they would feel heard. And so then again, I would feel connected. And so from a very young age, I realized, oh, humor and empathy, without having the words for it, are what allow me to feel like I have some value and allow me to feel like I have some connection. And so although those were developed as a way to kind of make myself feel valuable and use as kind of a security blanket, it now is the crux of everything that I do, because now I've grown in my own transformation. Well, I've shrunk in my body, but I've grown in my other transformations. And now I can use that stuff. Not to say that it's not always pure. Sometimes, of course, I'm looking for validation. I'm looking for approval. It's kind of the human thing. We do that sometimes. But more often than not, I'm doing it because it truly is the essence of who I am. And I know it's how I make the biggest impact. And so that's just one of those things for me, is like, look back when you were younger. If you're trying to find that core essence, look at one of two things. Number one, what did you get love, praise, and approval for? Right? That's probably in some way, shape, or form a part of your core essence. But the other thing is, what did you get in trouble for? Because that's also a part of your core essence. I got in trouble all the time for being a class clown, talking too much, doing all these things, but it's who I am. And now I've been able to channel that into a way that's actually productive. So this whole transformation thing has been great, but really it's about going back to first order principles. Who am I really at my core? And how can I channel that in an effective way that actually makes a difference?
So when I was in Catholic school, and we would get effort and conduct grades, and I would get a C in conduct, but the effort grade was how my dad would punish or not punish me. So if
Ooh.
I got a B in effort, but a C in conduct, it was basically the nuns telling my parents that I was trying really hard. And it happened so many times. I would come home, I'd be like, I got a C, but listen, I got a B in effort. Obviously, I'm trying. I would sell that, and my dad would be like, well, you got a good point there. And I'm like, Dad, I can't sit in a classroom and not talk. I can't sit in here. This is all this energy and intensity is meant to go out into the world. It's not meant to be locked up in a dungeon or a cave.
Right.
And school is a cave. And I never felt like we had the outlet. You get 20 minutes of recess, 10 minutes of recess, and then the older you get less.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that's a great point. And finding that outlet and that connection with humor is also a really fun thing. Being the center of that stage is fun when you're in front of your class or the audience or whatever. There's energy that you get from that. And that's why you say it's selfish, because it feels so damn good.
It really does, man. And you know, it's like it's a drug, but it's like it's one you can't overdose on, and it doesn't have any long-lasting impact negatively on your system.
Yeah, giving is selfish, and it's not selfish for the reason that people think. It's selfish because it really does something to us inside. It's something that I'm super interested in, and just a topic I'd like to talk a little bit about for a minute is there's a lot that we are more and more single families today, single parents today, especially single moms. My sister was a single mom, had two girls. My niece now has a son she's raising as a single mom. Extremely challenging. And my best friend growing up had a single mom. And the things you described were some of the things I remember that I didn't really put a price tag on until I got older, meaning that I had the ability with mom and dad to really become my own self, my own version. And my best friend had a lot of time in his life where he was taking care of his mom, where his identity was tied to her challenges or emotions or whatever. And I feel like this is something that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot, but if you're talking to, you know, a parent, a single parent who is a high performer, who's listening to this, what are some things they can do to help their children find their own identity quicker, and not to be the crutch, but to be that uplifting force that a lot of times two-parent families provide?
Yeah, it's such a great question, man. And going back to what you were just talking about with your, you know, your effort grade and all that stuff, schools are so good at playing to the lowest common denominator, right? There's no space for you to really be who you are. It's if you're not compliant, then you're defiant, right? That's the way it works. And so being yourself is an act of defiance. Imagine being taught that. Like, that's what we're being taught in schools. And again, no fault of their own. They have to play to all these different kids at once, right? So I get it. So as a parent of any kind, but especially single parents, as we're talking about this, allow the act of finding out who you are to not be an act of defiance, right? Allow there to be space for that within reason. I mean, you don't tell the kid, okay, well, you don't feel like school anymore, fine, just go do whatever you want as a 7-year-old. But when a 7-year-old comes up and says, I want to be a superhero, and I remember this, dude, I remember this. It was like 2015. It's when I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time. I was at the pool. It was summer. Everything's beautiful and hot and amazing. And I'm sitting at the pool, and I see this little boy playing with his mom in the pool. And the little boy says to his mom, and maybe she was having a rough day, I don't find any fault with her, but he said to her, I want to be a Power Ranger one day. And she's like, you can't be a Power Ranger. That's not real. And I'm just like, he doesn't actually mean he wants to be a Power Ranger. He wants to feel powerful. He wants to be empowered. He wants to be able to help people. Maybe he wants to be in martial arts. Maybe he wants to like serve the community. So even if he can't be a Power Ranger because that's not a real thing, find the thing behind the thing and say, that's interesting. Well, tell me, honey, what is it about Power Rangers that makes you so excited? And then nurture that, right? And maybe take them to do community service or take them to do martial arts and start nurturing the thing that's coming up naturally instead of shutting it down.
Yeah, curiosity is crucial there. And as parents, you do often react instead of responding because you are doing the best thing you can do. I find with a lot of single parents from experience and you know, watching this interaction is that sometimes the child becomes their best friend. The child becomes their crutch. And that's really where the challenge becomes when you're trying to develop on your own. It's very difficult. The parent thinks they're loving you more than anything and anyone could ever be loved. But if you're not loving someone enough to let them go, you're not really loving them the way they need to be loved. And that's a really big challenge when that's your partner. We were not meant to be partnered with our children. We're meant to be a leader to them. And so that's a very big challenge, and one that really is hard to break as people get older.
Yeah, because it becomes a peer relationship, right? And kids aren't prepared to have a peer relationship with their parents. And exactly to your point, the amount of love that a single parent can show can then become kind of enmeshment. And it shuts down the kid from being their own person. And I had my own version of that as well, right? And so it's really important also and this is really for all of us, but I think another thing that I've seen a lot of single parents that I've just known personally deal with is the fear of asking for help, right? This person that's in your life, your child, they're not going anywhere. They're literally in the household with you. And it's really easy to kind of use them as an outlet, because then nobody knows that you're struggling except for this little human that came from you anyways, right? And so just being open to the fact, like, it's okay to raise your hand and say, I am completely out of my depth. I have no idea what to do. My kid's being a complete brat. I don't know how to handle this kid anymore, like whatever it is, but reach out for help. Let that outlet be somebody who's actually a peer instead of converting your child into a peer.
Yeah, it's one of the things that makes people so successful in business, right? We find mentors and we learn from those mentors. We fail forward. And in order to learn at a much faster pace, you have to find someone who's already been there and done that. And if you do that, then you're able to really expand upon that. But for some reason with parenthood, and this goes for dual parents as well as single parents, there is a isolation of, we don't want anyone to know these things. And the best advice, the best opportunities, the best conversations come from the outside in. It's really good gaining that mentorship from people that have been there and done it, as well as people that have struggled with it.
100%. And there's also so much, I feel like there's such a shame-based culture that we live in. And like, if you have to admit anything that you're not perfect at, then there's some kind of shame around that. And I know for me, when I was going through a really tough time, probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I got into this mode where I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to ask anybody for help. I'm just going to deal with it myself. I'm going to be a complete hypocrite because I would tell everybody else to ask for help, but not me. I'm going to instead be in my shame and not ask for any help. And then I realized I couldn't get through that time on my own. I was going to need to reach out. My story, though, was not just shame. It was also burden. I don't want to be a burden on anybody else. Everybody has their own stuff. I don't want to be another person putting my crap on them, right? And so I decided to use that as my leverage for myself to reach out for help. And what I mean by that is I called 4 people that were very close to me that I needed their help, even though I totally didn't want to ask for it. I reached out and I said, hey, I'm going through this really tough thing right now. And I'm telling you up front, I am going to feel like a burden by asking you for help. I can feel it in my soul right now as I'm asking, but I need you to know I need your help. And I need you to know that I'm feeling like a burden as I'm asking for your help. Like, just call it out. And of course, every single one of those people said, you would never be a burden. Like, I'm here for you no matter what, anytime you need it. And it helped me to know that by calling out that fear and having them reassure me that that wasn't the case, it made it much safer for me to reach out for help.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's funny because giving, we talked about earlier as being this selfish thing, but something that really can build your impact and build your energy and make you feel so good. The next level of giving is receiving. And most of us really, really struggle. I know I've struggled as I had more and more success in my life. There have been times where, I'm just picking up the tab and helping people do things because I know I'm in a better spot. And someone will look at you and be like, hey, you have to be able to take too. You can't just give. It's not fair. It's not appropriate. I don't like it. And, and I've tried to be better at this internally because it just got to the point where I just really loved helping. And guess what? It's almost like it goes in the opposite direction. I got rid of the ego. You get rid of it. You're helping everybody, but then helping everybody becomes another level that you have to shed. You have to be a peer. And so what you're talking about is, and I think this is in your book, right? It's one of your favorite, I forget which chapter it was. Was it 8? Something that you, I don't know if there was you don't have the numbers.
Your intuition is drunk.
Intuition is drunk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's one of my favorite chapters of the book, and it really is like, and this goes for ego stuff, it goes for stress stuff, it goes for anxiety stuff, and intuition. I live in Southern California, so intuition is said as much as coffee. I mean, it's just that's a word everybody drops. You can't throw a quarter in LA without hitting a life coach, and so intuition is a big thing, and I believe in intuition. The challenge is that I think a lot of times we mistake fear voices for intuition voices, right? There's some little voice speaking in our head and we think it's intuition, but it's really fear. And so the way I talk about this in the book, and the reason it's one of my favorite chapters, is because it's one of the ones I need to go back for myself and revisit, not because I think it's some masterful piece of art. And so the idea, the metaphor in there is, if you have somebody in your life, it's a friend, a coach, an uncle, an aunt, whoever it is that you go to when you need help, and they are just amazing. They always have your best interest at heart. They'll drop everything for you whenever that you need them. And you're going through a really tough time. And so, of course, you go to this person, you go to their house, and you walk in the door, and you want to ask them this question so you can get their help. And when you walk in, you see them on the floor, completely drunk, right? Like David Hasselhoff eating the hamburger drunk, right? Just like really just gone. Would you ask that person for help in that moment? No, of course not, because they're not in the state to be able to help you. And actually, in that state, you'd probably say, you know what? This person has been here for me so much. Let me just put my thing aside for a minute and let me just take care of them. Let me get them up on the couch. Let me give a glass of water, make sure they're okay. I'm going to sit with them until they sober up. And you can't force them to sober up, right? They'll sober up naturally as time goes on. And then once they're sober, then if you still have a question you want to ask them, you ask them the question. And the relevance to our own intuition is that that's what happens a lot of times. We're in a low state of mind. We're beating ourselves up. We're engaging with all this unhelpful thinking. And then we ask ourselves a question like, am I cut out for this, right? I'm an entrepreneur. Am I cut out to be an entrepreneur? Well, when you're in a low state of mind and your intuition's drunk, your intuition says, no, idiot, you suck. Go get a job at a grocery store. There's no way you're ever going to be an entrepreneur. Like, why would you even think you could do something on your own? You need to have a boss. You need to have some. And that's what your intuition tells you. But your intuition's drunk in that moment. So I never want to listen to what the voices are saying in my head when my intuition's drunk. I want to let myself sober up. I want to let myself naturally soothe myself back into a place where I'm back to groundedness, back to equanimity. And then I can ask myself the question. And the way you know it's your intuition answering you is that your intuition will always be kind, right? It'll still be confronting. It'll still be kind of direct, but it'll always be kind. So if you're getting anything other than a kind response from asking yourself a question, that's not your intuition. And you need to wait a little while before asking that question to yourself.
Yeah, it becomes so fear-based and anxious and uncomfortable. And there's a self-awareness that comes with actually having to dial in and understand. I know I find this, I use the life model, excuse me, internally, I use the life model for myself, and I've used it as a way to overcome overwhelm, because what I do is I love impact, faith, and energy. I take those 4 categories and I get a huge, like one of those big white calendars, that you have on your desk that you used to have in the 1980s and 90s. And I flip it over and I write love, impact, faith, and energy, make 4 quadrants and 4 boxes. And I brain dump, because usually what I find when I get to a spot where I'm not able to function at the highest capacity, I'm not really moving in the direction I need to be moving in, or maybe I'm stuck, is that there's too much on my brain and I can't get through it. So I have to brain dump to start. Then I have to prioritize, what are the most important things that I'm doing? What are the most important things that I'm not doing? And it starts to add clarity. And then it becomes who, not how. Who can I lean on? Not how am I going to do this alone? And that's, I feel like it's the same thing you just mentioned in just a little bit of a different way, but it's how I've coped with the same struggles.
Yeah. And what you said too, you said something in there that people will gloss over as being overly simple, but it's a game changer. It's just to get stuff out of your head and put it on paper. I guarantee there's so many people listening to this would be like, oh yeah, writing it down. I'm still going to have so many problems. I'm still going to be overwhelmed.
With your hand, like with your hand.
Yeah, not on the phone, not on an iPad, not typing on a computer, with your hand. I promise you, Scott and I are making a guarantee. Your life will be at least 1% less overwhelming if you get all the crap out of your head and put it down on paper.
I'll make a guarantee that you have brought 5% of joy to everyone listening if they go in and they start to write down. I have people do this with fear. So somebody can tell you that they're scared of something. I had a friend of mine who as COVID was starting to break, he was like the last guy wearing a mask in the room, and he was running with the mask on and like everything. And I was like, hey, he's a good friend. And I said, hey, I'm not criticizing. I just want to understand, what are you worried about?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, my kids. And then he was like, I know that's ridiculous. And then he goes, oh, everybody else, I don't know what they're doing. Oh, I know it's ridiculous. And he started like giving me reasons why he was ridiculous. And I said, have you written it down? And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, have you written down what you're afraid of? And he said, no. He literally went up in the hotel room, wrote down what he was afraid of. I come down the elevator. He's in shorts and a t-shirt going for a run with no mask. And he's like, dude, it worked. I'm crazy. What is wrong with me? And it's not about the, I'm not judging why or why not one would wear the mask. What I'm judging is the fact that he had built it up so he was so fear-based in his brain that he wasn't able to make that honest association and of fixing it and getting out of his own head and writing it down. Just writing it down changes everything. So it's a great exercise.
Well, yeah, and there's something that's even deeper psychologically that's involved in that, because when you do that, when you write something down, and there are other ways to do this thing that I'm about to say, but writing it down is a really key part. It's a thing called depersonalization, right? So when all these thoughts are in your head, you merge with the thoughts. We merge with the thoughts, and now all of a sudden, it's not him and the thoughts that he's afraid of. It's him, the thoughts that he's afraid of. He is the thoughts. Right. And if I am something, you're not going to take that away from me. You're not going to say, hey, you know what, by the way, I'm going to take the hair off your head and take it with me. No, you're not. That's my hair. You're not. Well, I'm going to take your house. Like, no, you're not taking my house. That's my house. So when you merge with something, of course, you're going to try to protect it with everything you can. But once you start depersonalizing, you have some distance, it changes everything. So one of the ways I do this is that when I say things like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I shift that from I'm overwhelmed or I'm stressed or I'm anxious to my thinking is overwhelmed. My thinking is stressed. My thinking is anxious, because now there's a little bit of separation, and my thinking becomes like, if you go to the doctor and you say, I'm in pain, the doctor can't help you. The doctor has no idea what to do with I'm in pain. But when I say my knee hurts, the doctor says, oh, I can deal with a knee, but I can't deal with I am in pain. And the same thing happens here. I can't deal with I am stressed, but I can deal with, oh, this localized part of me called my thinking is currently swimming in stressful thoughts. That I can deal with.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I find myself sometimes doing the I am exercise in a reverse, where I start to say, I am focused. I am strong enough to get through these things. I just build up this self-talk, this coaching, and it's something I've done throughout my life. And, it's really, it's utilizing the same exact mentality. It's flipping it. But I also find myself sometimes saying, I am stressed, I am overwhelmed, and having that separation. That's another way that we all can implement it. And you said something earlier that I think was really good. And I love to bring this up, because just because someone teaches it, just because someone knows it, just because someone is an expert at something, doesn't mean they do it 100% of the time. If you're doing it 70, 80% of the time, but the other 20, you have to remind yourself of something that you said or you believe in. Like, this is part of life. We are all imperfect. And knowing that our imperfections are part of what helps us teach it. Because when we're teaching it, sometimes we're reminding ourselves just to actually do it, right? And that's, I think you were leading to that earlier, where you're like, hey, just because I'm teaching it or telling someone about it doesn't mean that I'm doing it 100% of the time.
Absolutely. And people will say that to me. They'll read the book or they'll see me talk on stage and they're like, self-leadership, I get it. Awesome. How do I do it 100% of the time? And I say, when you find out, let me know, because I have no freaking clue. So the goal, the job of once we find out what it is that actually is going to make us happy, and we understand kind of the working of the mind and all the things that you talk about here on being a high performer, the job is to wake up every day and point ourselves in the general direction of that thing. Right. And some days we'll get up and we'll look in the general direction of that thing and we won't move. We'll just stare at it, but we'll say, I know, even though I'm not moving right now, that is the direction I'm meant to be going. And the next day, maybe I'll take 2 steps, and the next day, maybe 12 steps. And the next day after that, maybe I'll take 2 steps back, but I'm still pointing in the general direction, saying, even though I didn't nail it today, I know that direction, questioning my thoughts, challenging my thoughts, inquiring into these stories, writing stuff down, being consistent. I know that's what I meant to be doing. And I'm giving myself a break and not going to beat myself up about it today, knowing that tomorrow I can make a new choice.
Yeah. Everything is about trends. And what you want is you want to be trending in the right direction,
Right.
moving. You say that you didn't lose 130 plus pounds at one time. You lost 1 pound, and then the next pound, and then the next pound, and the 130 times, right? And so it starts with that movement in the right direction. And we all need to be reminded. And sometimes we take a couple steps back to move 5 more forward. And
100%.
that's a natural progression.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really believe that the easiest way to slow your progress is to judge your progress. Right. That's the easiest way. And I always think about it this way. When you're sitting inside of an airplane and you look outside the window, it looks like you are not moving. You literally look like you're standing still. Yeah. But if you were in a helicopter or a drone outside of the plane watching it, the damn thing's slicing through the air at 500 miles an hour, right? So just remember that things always look different from the inside, and it's not how it's actually going on the outside. So really giving ourselves patience. I'm talking to myself, by the way, when I say this, really being patient and not judging our progress on the way.
Yeah, and it also helps to practice what you believe in, meaning that if you don't want other people to judge you, it does us good. It does us good to not judge others as well. And it's a challenge. These are things that you could find yourself in the normal daily. You could be helping somebody in one instance, and then the very next second going, what is this idiot doing over here? If you drive, I've been spending a lot of time on the roads. One of my sons just moved out of the house. He's only 14, but he's playing soccer at an academy, and we're driving back and forth all the time. I'm on the road a lot. I am angry about left lane drivers. When you are trying to get up and there's traffic for no reason, I'm listening to like a spiritual teaching and I'm in this great space. And then I'm like, can this guy just freaking move out of the left lane? What is going on right now? And it's like immediate. You know that there's no benefit in it. You know that there's nothing you do about it. And then an hour into the drive, you find yourself in the left lane. You've zoned out. You don't know what's happening, and someone's honking at you and passing you in the right. And you're like, oh, I'm one of those people. Yep. So it's the same thing. Like, we have to be aware that we are all in the same game, doing our best every single day.
That's right. Yep. It's 100% right. I heard somebody say recently, don't attribute to malice what could just be ignorance. Right. And ignorance, not meaning you're stupid, like literally not realizing, right? Being ignorant to the facts. So, somebody cutting me off in traffic, oh, that's malicious. They meant to do that to me, versus they have 50 million things in their mind and they were ignorant of the fact that I was right behind them. Right. Doesn't make it okay from a safety perspective, but from a keeping my own sanity and blood pressure in check perspective, it makes a huge difference. Yeah.
The awareness, not only our own individual self-awareness, but our external awareness. So many people go through life as robots. We're just walking through doing the same thing every day, and everything around us we ignore it. All you have to do is go to a boardwalk. I live in Virginia Beach, and you ride your bike on the boardwalk, and people just walk through the bike path constantly, and they stand there and they have no awareness. You do it again. It's like the left lane. You're like, oh, it's a bike path, guys. You got to know, right? But at a certain point in time, they don't, because there's really no awareness of what's around them. Their awareness is this tight circle of their 2 kids, or the shower they're rinsing off in, or they got to get to the car and they're going to be wet when they get in the car. We're all in this world. And so the more we're self-aware and the more we're socially aware, the better we can make that impact that we're all trying to make, right?
Yeah, and make it a game if you can. So my girlfriend and I have a game, because we have, one of our biggest pet peeves is people that just like stand too close to you, like when you're in line or in the airport or whatever. Just people that are like on top of you. You can hear their heart beating. They're so close to you, right? And so we've made up a song, and the song is spatial awareness, spatial. And so we just sing it to each other when it happens. Or if people are really close to us, we can't say the words, we'll hum the tune to each other. And it's a way to make ourselves laugh at the absurdity of what we would otherwise get really upset about.
Oh, it's like the old Jerry Seinfeld close talker.
Yeah, and, exactly.
Yeah, I know. We just did a cruise through Europe, and if you want to, every country has a different spatial awareness. So like in different places, there are lines and formed perfectly, and then there are places where there are no lines, and for different reasons. Like I go to Italy and I feel like I was meant to be there. Obviously, it's my great grandparents came over from Sicily, so there's some tie there. But you go there, it's a bunch of entrepreneurs. There's no lines. Nobody knows what's happening. They're just inching in front of you constantly.
Sicily's a madhouse. Yeah, I was just there in July. It's a madhouse. It's amazing.
Yeah, I love it. I love all of the food, the experience, the pace of life. It's just really, really special to be in Europe. But go to a different country and you realize that spatial awareness is a whole different ballgame.
Totally different.
What were you doing in Sicily when you were out there? Were you just visiting or?
Yeah, just visiting, just kind of hanging out with some friends. We went from North Italy to South Italy, just kind of check stuff out. And my girlfriend's actually English, so it's funny you say that. We're actually heading back to the UK on Tuesday, and even the lines there, like there's more spatial awareness, it feels like, when we're in like London versus being in Los Angeles. And it's just such an interesting thing. People have their own ways of doing things, and you either have to integrate or stop going to those places. Like, you have a choice, right? All the things that upset you in life, you have a choice of whether or not to participate in those things. And I mean everything, like even driving. And people say, oh, well, you can't get around if you don't drive. Of course you can. You can take buses, you can walk, you can ride a bike. Oh, but that's inconvenient. Well, okay, that's your trade-off. I'd rather the inconvenience of somebody being a little slow in the left lane or cutting me off than having to bike 17 miles to get to where I want to go.
Well, your choices become very evident. I flew last week home, and it's a 35-minute flight. And normally I drive, it's a 3.5 to 4 hour drive, right? I sat on the runway for 2+ hours for a 35-minute drive. So the perspective is, we all have choices and we make them and we stand by them. And as I was sitting there, I was like, you know what? You chose this because it was easier. It was faster. It was quicker. There's no reason to getting upset. And there really wasn't. I was able to function quite well because we could choose whether or not we want to be offended or annoyed in a situation, even with our close talkers or our people. Like, it's a choice. The left lane, I'm choosing that at the end of the day. And how I receive that information, as Viktor Frankl says, is really that only thing that you still control when everything else is taken away from you.
Yeah, it's really true. I truly believe that joy and misery are both a choice. And the extent to which I experience joy or misery is the extent to which I get sucked into the content of life that I'm seeing versus sitting back and being able to witness the content of life that I'm seeing. Because if I'm in a movie theater and there's like an axe murderer in a horror movie, there's no part of me that actually feels like I'm unsafe, that somebody's going to chop me in half with an axe, because I know that I'm watching a movie. If I forgot that fact and actually thought I was in it, which happens sometimes where you're like super sucked into a movie and then somebody like accidentally hits your chair and you're like, oh, I forgot I was watching a movie, right? You get really sucked into the movie. That's what we do too. And that's why my favorite and the most spiritual Marvel character that there is in my mind is Deadpool. Because Deadpool, with all his gratuitous violence, is the only Marvel character who knows he's in a comic book. He breaks the fourth wall in the movie and talks to us. But even though he knows it's all like created, it's not a real reality, that doesn't make him say, well, this is just a comic book, I'll just go sit on the couch and wait to die. He's still very sincere about what he's doing in the comic book. And we can be the same way. We can be sincere about what we're doing in the movie, but we don't want to take the movie too seriously.
Yeah, and that goes for everything. Like, when you find yourself talking about your career, your job to somebody, and you start getting into the weeds, like, you know, Susie, every time she does this, and Elizabeth and John, and you start, when you get lost in that world and everyone around you is looking at you like, dude, do you know you're right here, right now? Like, you're not at work. You're not there anymore. Everything's fine. We don't need to know every detail about how the paper got jammed in the printer, and like, nobody cares. Yeah. But we all do that. We all get lost in ourselves. And what we're looking for is the same thing you mentioned earlier. We're just looking to be heard, to be seen, to be, you know, to have someone have empathy for what we felt earlier. And it's very natural. It's a natural tendency, right?
Totally. 100%.
What are some of the things you're working on that you're super excited about, man? You obviously are doing some cool stuff. You get to speak a lot. You get to train and work with, you know, celebrities and people that need help. But what are some cool things you're excited about, and just share that with us? I think it'd be fun.
Yeah. So two main things I'm working on that I'm really excited about. One is a new keynote, and it's around these 4 identities of leadership, right? Of being a self-leader. I kind of believe that the only real leadership is self-leadership. You can't really lead others. You can feed others. You can nurture others. You can activate self-leadership in others, but I can't actually lead people. And so these 4 identities are a way for you to step into self-leadership in a way that you can help to lead others in that way, right? And they're really fun. There's the postal worker, the activist, the stand-up comedian, and the freestyle rapper. And these are 4 different avatars. They're states, not stages. And so you can call on whichever one you need. If you need to maximize performance and productivity, you call on the postal worker, right? They get things done no matter what, no matter rain, snow, sleet, or hail, they always get stuff done. You got the activist, who's all about purpose, right? So if you really want to maximize purpose, instead of saying, oh, how do I get myself to be better at this job? You get to, what's your 5%, right? What are you actually trying to activate in people, and what's your mission, like we talked about earlier? earlier. You have the stand-up comedian who just doesn't take things too seriously. They're sincere about their work. You look at Seinfeld, he's still testing jokes on stage after 30 years in the business or whatever it's been. They're very sincere, but they don't take things too seriously. They question the serious thoughts in their head and they say, how can I play with this? So that's when you want to maximize play. And the last one is the freestyle rapper. Freestyle rappers cannot prepare at all. They have to show up and be so present with who's in the room, what's in the room, and responding to that from a really thoughtful place that they have to just really be in tune. So those are the four kind of avatars that I've been playing with to make this new Keynote. So I'm really excited about that. And then also part of my weight loss journey, I was 330 pounds and lost over 130 pounds. Part of that was having weight loss surgery. I had bariatric surgery back in 2011, 12 years ago, and it was not as widely talked about as it is now, but there are so many struggles for people that have that surgery to stay healthy, to lose the weight, to keep it off, and to do it in a healthy way afterwards. So I'm starting a new supplement line specifically for people who have had bariatric surgery. And the kicker is that by buying the supplements, they actually get access to an entire support network behind the scenes, because that's really what dictates the success or the failure is, do you have support when you're going through these big transitions? So those are the two main things that I'm really excited about, man.
Well, you know, the self-leadership point, John Maxwell says leadership is influence. Yeah. And really it is important. You can only do so much, right? But you have to start with yourself. So I think that's going to be a cool project. And now you mentioned a freestyle rapper. And I find myself when I'm seeing like Harry Mack or one of those guys on TikTok, or I'm like, I can't not watch that. Like that guy he's like, give me 3 things. And it's like green and waves and, you know, weaves. And all of a sudden they're like, boom, he throws them out. It's unbelievable. So the frequency at which they're operating at is significant. Now, is that how you got on the stage with Wu-Tang or how? Tell me about this story.
Yeah. So I got into hip hop really early. I think the first 2 CDs I bought from a garage sale across the street from my house. I was 13 years old, and I bought 2 CDs. They couldn't be more juxtaposed. I bought Dr. Dre's The Chronic, which is a 13-year-old. I shouldn't have bought that. And then and DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince Summertime. Those are the 2 CDs that I bought first. And I just got sucked into it. I was like, this is amazing. I love hip hop. And so I became just a hip hop fanatic, started writing my own lyrics around 16 or so. I remember sitting there with a Nas CD. And this is back when they had the little pamphlets with the words inside, like all the lyrics. And I remember sitting there and just rewriting his lyrics just to see what it would feel like to write raps, right? Even though they were just his lyrics. And so then I started writing my own, and then I fell in with this crew around like when I was 19 years old or so, and they were actually producing music, and they brought me into the crew, and we started making music together, and then we started doing shows all over the East Coast. And at some point in Orlando, we became the go-to hip hop group in Orlando. So when any major artist would come in to play at like the House of Blues, for example, they would call us and say, hey, this artist is coming in. You guys have a group. We had a group of like 6 guys. They're like, we don't want 6 guys on stage. So pick whatever 1 or 2 of you wants to open up for this artist. So an artist would come into town. We would talk internally. So, you know, Busta Rhymes is coming in town. And so 2 of the guys in the group were like, I got to open for them. And then Wu-Tang would come in. I'm like, I got to open for them. And we would kind of pick and choose. And so we got these great opportunities to open for these major artists.
That's pretty cool.
It was fun.
That is definitely cool. Now, what is your go-to choice for music today? What are you listening to now?
Dude, I am through and through. I love like R&B and soul music, especially 90s. I still think the 90s is the greatest era of music ever. And they say
like Boys to Men, Jodeci, like Boys to Men, Jodeci.
For the classic stuff, sure. But now it's like the soul. So it's like, who are some of the people? Her, like H.E.R. Dylan Francis. I can't think of the names right now, but all these like newer age kind of jazzy soul, neo soul kind of artists. I love it, man. It moves me. And I still love hip hop. I'm a Drake fan. Everybody hates on Drake. I still love Drake too.
Yeah. You know what? I think if you're truly aware of who you are, you can like something not based on whether or not everybody else loves it or not. And 100%. You know, that I've always been drawn to any kind of music. If it moves me, if it's something I like, then I'll listen to it. And if it's not, then, you know, my kids will say, hey, have you heard this? And I'll listen to anything they put in front of me. And if I don't like it, I'll be like, it's not my thing right now, but they might not know this, but I will put it on multiple times and see if I was just new and I couldn't understand it. I'll get curious about it because I want to understand that next level of music, that next level of cool. And really, sometimes it's just the older we get, the more we fall in love with things that are old, you know,
nostalgic. And yeah, for sure. Do you have a song or a genre you've listened to recently that you were surprised that you liked it?
You know, I would say I'm not surprised. My grandfather was a radio singer. And so some little the go-to that I listen to a lot is I listen to a lot of like Louis Armstrong and music from just the old days, because it soothes me. My brain is probably a lot like yours, that high frequency, high energy. So I need to listen to something that I can't sing and I can't try to learn. I
Yeah.
just need to hear and listen to it as background. And so I tend to lean into some of that stuff. I also listen to classical music, believe it or not, all the time, just because it helps me focus. It helps me stay completely. It's the only thing I can listen to where I'm not going into a different, like if I hear a song that I love and I start singing, I'll be in the store and I'll hear Mariah Carey and I'll be like, oh man, I remember that song. I'll go in the car, I'll play Mariah Carey. I will go like down memory lane for like an hour.
Yep.
And I love music like that. So it's a great question. But the Avett Brothers are something I listen to a lot. They're kind of like Americana. They're rock. They're bluegrass. They do all kinds of stuff, but they're great entertainers. And so I brought a couple of friends and my some family members and some other people. I've introduced the band to a lot of people. I don't know the band yet. Maybe one day they'll be on this podcast, but we I brought them to a concert and people that had never heard it. And I was like, I'm telling you, I know what you like. You'll like this. And they all came and they left. They were like, I got in their car the other day and one of my buddies was listening to the song. I was like, you like it? It worked. So I kind of like that too, that connection thing where you can bring somebody into your vibe.
Yeah. I love that. And music is such a connector, man. It's like of people, like, like especially people at concerts. My favorite thing at concerts is when people who don't know each other, total strangers, but they're there to see the same artist. And then they're like singing at each other in the audience, even though they don't know the people, but they're just so psyched that they're connecting over this thing.
Yeah.
Music is such a game changer.
It's moments of energy, right? It's energy exchange. It's moments of, if you're open to receive what's happening in that environment, cool stuff happens. I mean, I go to concerts a lot by myself because my wife and I like the same stuff, but she likes to go to bed fairly early. So, concerts don't often fall into the bed routine. And so, I'm pretty adventurous. I'm like, oh, well, it's whatever. So I traveled to go see, an artist that I had seen right before the COVID shutdown. And COVID was something that when it hit and we had the lockdown and musicians stopped playing, it was probably the number one, I don't want to say the number one. I would say the number one personal thing that I missed the most was going to see live music. I forgot how much I loved it. And so coming out in 2021, as people started to tour again, I started to make a note of everybody that I was going to see. And I would build my business, my days, my trips, everything around those shows. And so I was at a show and it was at a university. It was at the University of Virginia. And, they were still kind of practicing social distancing. And I was like, this is awesome. I walked right up to the front. I'm there by myself. Everyone around me is super young. They only know the new songs, and they don't know any of the old stuff. And so at one point in time, like the artist and I, like he's like, I'm 40 now, blah, blah. And like, there's like a look, and I might've been like the only 40-year-old dude in the audience. And we kind of exchanged this glance. And he was like, before COVID, I played at this place. Where any of you, I'm thinking to myself, none of these people were alive. Like they were alive, but they were not listening to this music. They just got this song. And we kind of made eyes at that moment. It was really funny. But that energy exchange happens. And I love that. And I think only music, comedy is another thing. You love comedy. Who are you watching right now? Who are you digging?
There's one comedian who it depends on your taste, but there's a guy called Daniel Sloss. He's like a 27, 28-year-old, I think he's Scottish, comedian. And he has this Netflix special called Jigsaw.
Okay.
And about an hour long. And he has some, questionable, I wouldn't say he's raunchy, but he tells some kind of,
he's a comedian. He's got to be edgy.
100%. But the thing about it that I would advise everybody to watch, and if you want, just skip the first half if you don't want some of the off color stuff. The entire second half of it is his theory about relationships, right? About like romantic relationships. And this guy, it's one of the most poignant, powerful things I've ever heard. And he actually says at the end of this, if you break up with your partner because of what I said here today, tweet me. And they've, to this day, they have like 10,000 people who have broken up because of what he shared. Because essentially at the end of this, you start thinking like, wow, am I actually with this person for the right reason? And so he says, like, if there's any trouble in your relationship, don't watch the special. But if you really are just interested in relationship stuff and you have a partner, either you're single and you're just curious, or you have a partner who's open to watching something that may be good just for a thought experiment, it's a brilliant thing to watch.
Sounds to me like people should watch it by themselves and bring their partner in later, just in case they're the ones that are forced to leave, unbeknownst to them.
Yes.
Yeah, I find I'll have to watch it. I like all comedy. I pretty much there's parts of you know, the new guys like Theo Vaughn who have just popped on, and I'm like, I don't know where this guy came from, but he's cracking me up on a regular
he was
basis.
a reality TV star. I know him from like the early 90s when he was on MTV, and then I saw him as a comedian. I'm like, oh, I remember this guy.
I wasn't watching MTV. It was just outside of my MTV watching day. Like I feel like it just stepped out, but I remember he was there. But he's just he has an act and he stays to it, and it's hilarious to me. And Bill Burr does a lot of things that are edgy, and like he will say something like your guy about the relationships. Like he says stuff and you're like, that is funny. He talked about 80s and 90s. He talked about growing up in the 80s and how like your father was a completely different character than what kids are today. Like now kids come in and they're like, Dad, can I share my feelings with you? And he's like, we were just trying to actually not piss Dad off when he walked in the door. It was a completely different scenario. So
yeah, Bill Burr is great. I love him too. There's a new guy too called, I think his name is Matt Rife. Have you seen him?
Yeah, guy's hilarious.
And I guess, did Dane Cook discover him?
Yeah, and Dane got canceled or something happened to Dane. I don't know what happened, but Dane was hilarious at like he was doing huge shows, and then I don't remember what happened, but I know that he kind of fell off, but he's still hilarious, and he has been pulling these comedians. So Matt Rife he's severely handsome. So I think that he's really he's intriguing to the male and female audience, which is extremely interesting because he's a young kid and he's pretty open and funny. So yeah, I think comedy should always be new. And what you mentioned about Seinfeld earlier is, and it goes back to everything we're talking about. If we want to be good at anything, it requires practice. It requires time, right? And Seinfeld, I listened. I don't remember if it was Tim Ferriss that interviewed him. I don't remember which one it was. It's one of the best interviews I've listened to. But Seinfeld talked about the time he takes writing. And he spends like an hour and a half of uninterrupted writing time every single day. Even if he has nothing to write, he will take everything else away, have a pad, a pen, and that's it. No phone, no interruptions, no notifications. And he's been doing that for forever. And that's he started doing that because he was like a fast rising up and comer, and he got like this one person would not put him on the stage out in LA or something, and so he ended up going out to New York or some story along these lines. But he really just decided he was going to outwork everybody. And look at what he did. I mean, it's just but it's practice.
It's practice, and it's also the beginner's mind. Right. It's like, even though you're one of the biggest comedians, arguably the biggest comedian that's ever lived, the most notable comedian that's ever lived, and he still has the beginner's mindset. And I remember there was a guy 8 or 9 years ago that I interviewed, and he was a martial arts master. I don't remember if it was judo or aikido, but one of those. He was a martial arts master. And he told me a story I didn't know. He said, do you know where the whole concept of black belts came from? I said, no. And he said, well, they start off as white belts, like you normally would anyways. And he said, but they never wash the belts. And so as they continue to do their craft over and over, they get dirty, they would get dark, they would get, dingy. And that's kind of where black belt as a symbol for mastery came from. And I said, that's amazing. And I was getting ready to move on to the next thing. He goes, but there's something else. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, over time, that black belt would start getting frayed and the top level would start to fall off, and it would actually look like a white belt again. And that was their reminder that even as masters, there's always new things they can learn, and there are always things they can go back to that they think they mastered and go even deeper with that mastery. And so to me, just remembering that, like, the black belt comes from the process of mastery, and the white belt starting over is to remind you there's always more you can learn.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to tie music and comedy in together so that everybody that still listened to this, even though we went on a couple of tangents that were fun, they understand that it can all tie back together. And what I find about the comedians that are most exciting is when they're new, it's like a new album. When Pearl Jam dropped, when Nirvana dropped, when Dr. Dre Chronic dropped, like when you think of the first albums that somebody lays out, or even their second sometimes, where it's just Dave Matthews Band, Crash, like these are like iconic albums, right? They're best when they're new. But if they're constantly growing, comedians, musicians, they reinvent themselves constantly, and it goes right back to the black belt and the white belt. They have to, a lot of times they go back to their roots and they say, okay, what is it that I did great? I look at artists like the Counting Crows and Adam Duritz, who is still touring today and selling out, major places, and he reinvents himself. They don't even play the song the same every single time. Like, it's a constant foundational reinvention, and that growth is fun, but it's hard to get there. It's hard to stay relevant that way. But I like watching it happen.
Absolutely, man. I love that.
So how do people find you, man? It's been a great conversation that, I love learning about you as a human, plus the things you're working on. I think I'm really looking forward to the leadership and the 4 components that you're putting together on self-leadership. And I have not struggled with weight in my life, but I know a lot of people that have. So I think it's exciting that you're working on something that it feels like that's a very lonely place to be. And if that could be a less lonely place for somebody to do it, where a lot of times the decisions the rest of their family is making are some of the very things that are keeping them from being able to go forward in their own decisions. So I love that direction. But what are the ways that people can find you and listen to more of what you're doing and really help your cause and your impact?
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on here, man. I've loved the conversation as well. Love your freaking energy. You're a rock star. And yeah, you can find me, easiest place is Instagram. I am the Jason Goldberg on Instagram. I couldn't get Jason Goldberg, so I got the most pretentious name possible, the Jason Goldberg. So you can find me there, and we can hang out, and you can get a copy of my book for free there if you want, and see all my content and all that fun stuff.
Prison Break is the book. I have a copy. It is worth the read. I really appreciate the conversation. Jason's a blast, and we could obviously talk. We will talk again. So Thanks for joining me, man. I'm looking forward to this coming out and everybody else sharing in our conversation.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.